There we go. Great. Hey, BJ. Okay, so I don't know if have people seen the minutes? Have you had a chance to review? I thought they looked great. Yep. Catherine's not here to give her praise, but I thought she did a really great job. Yep. Anybody have any items on the minutes? Motion to approve? Yep. All in favor? Aye. All right. Okay, so Greg, I know you're just sitting down. Christina, I think is printing or did print. You would offer share screen.
Yeah. The August numbers, which were taken on August 28th. So there are a couple of, say, 2 weeks out. I guess the summary conclusion is I think that we should stay as guarded.
Okay.
I think in the long run, we may want to rethink what we assembled for the town board for
criteria
for the criteria, because the significance and importance, I guess, of what's happening on the feeder wells. You know, we're, for whatever reason, when some of the organizations had determined whether we're in a drought, abnormally dry or moderate drought, whatever it is, they seem to be a little behind the times for us, I believe. Anyway,
especially on the screen is real time, not up to the moment, but given that we have real time, it makes some sense that we'd be slightly ahead.
Yeah, this what's up there right now on the chart is just an example. It kind of illustrates what happens when we talk about what rain we get. This is the Goat Hill well, and you can see this was a rainstorm that we had in the middle of August, or excuse me, middle of July. This is a rainstorm we had in the middle of August, and there is a bump up. It's not huge, but it wasn't it wasn't feet of water, and the scale here is in feet. And the slope is remarkably stable. As you look at the slope from June to the middle of July, there's a bump up from the rain that we got, and then it's got right back down to that same slope, and it continued on through the end of August. And I imagine we may be able to see something here again with today's rainfall.
And today's rainfall is like what I think of as a good rainfall. It's like it's lasting during the course of the day. But we seem to keep getting these huge rainfalls that then 10 minutes later they're gone.
I'll take.
It seems to have a big impact on these real-time readings.
I'll take anyway. I'll take anything. Something that's got to be heavier than a heavy fog. That's everything wetter than that. Where we are in the chart, we're now above the 20th percentile with the big four wells in terms of where they are with the percentile reading. Manhasset is at 32%. Manwaring and Congdon are about 24.
We see that, Greg?
Christine, if you could scroll down, I think you'll have that. Is it not?
I sent this out. On the 2nd or 3rd of September.
Right, and there's the
scroll down.
It's there.
I don't. Okay. I didn't prepare this correctly. I'm sorry to say.
That's okay. Well, you can see the 20% and the 30. So you can see those numbers at the bottom of the screen there.
Yeah.
I just want, again, you should state of what? 30% of what? 20% of what? Of our average at this time?
No, again, if it's 50%, that is on the median.
Right.
So when we're at 24%, we're if you want to split this into quartiles, we're at the top end of the lowest quartile.
Right.
The only well, and the results on all of the shallower wells are much higher. They picked up that rain, it just went right down. If it's only 6 feet or 8 feet before it hits the aquifer, it's sitting there, it got down very quickly.
But our general understanding is that the big four represent hydrological pressure.
That's exactly correct, to keep the salt water out. The one well is Goat Hill well is at the 14th percentile. So, that's low.
Yeah.
Whether or not it was the slope, what's going on there, I don't know, certainly.
Okay. Well, let's, again, as you said, we're thinking about that we should revisit over the course of this now in the fall or in this year, our how we calibrate our drought advisory levels.
Yes. That is.
We should do that independent of like each month and like we're just responding to each month.
Right.
So let's put this on, let's just say we've taken a look, we see where we're at right now. We got a lot of rain happening outside, it happens to be today, we're on the response today.
Right.
Ken, did you want to just comment on what rainfall looks like this
Right
month?
now, we have a half inch of rain. So that helps us attack. September was very light. We're at 0.93 inches and a normal September is like 3 inches.
Really?
Rain, yeah. Year to date, a good reading could be, in the 30s. We're at 28.5 right now, 28.15.
Wow.
So we're definitely guarded, no question about it, from the standpoint of the precipitation topics.
Right. And so, again, just to keep the committee, it seems like we're getting a lot of feedback these days. And we will have Caitlin Cunningham from the USGS joining us and reviewing the Southbury Hills real-time data, giving us a better sense of context for some of the folks who are going to speak today. So I'm thinking that perhaps the next meeting, November, is where we should be targeting review of the drought advisory levels.
Right, okay.
Okay.
So will we want to have a set of revised criteria to discuss at that meeting?
Yes, and I know the people in the shallow areas are going to be more sort of sensitive to that. And so, let's, outside of our real-time discussion, let's keep talking in email about, what suggested criteria might be and how we might revise.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, you can consider yourselves a subcommittee, but, as long as you don't get together, no, actually, now we can get together in various ways, so.
Are there any guidelines that we could be looking at for parameters? For these new, anything out there that we could be borrowing from to create new guidelines?
There are, the drought forecast is part of it is based on the soil moisture, which I think would be what the farmers that would be, and they have criteria. I'll put some stuff out to the committee.
Yeah,
Right,
that'd be helpful.
suggestive, exactly.
The drought, how the drought forecasting and how the drought classification, how it all comes about.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so, that should be item 3. Do we need to linger? Does anybody feel a need to comment on just our current rainfall and water levels? So our next big event is coming up on September 28th at the library, and Lisa's leading for us, but we're doing this not as just the WAC. We're hosting along with the WQI and CAC and the Green Committee. Lisa is putting together a presentation around fertilizer education regulation approaches. Tim Pertel will also be joining us. If, there's one option is to regulate fertilizers, and another option is not to use fertilizers by landscaping in appropriate ways, and Tim can speak to that. So Lisa's put together a little bit of an outline of what she's thinking about.
Yeah, this is very rough, but I've been sort of pulling information from what is already out there with regards to towns and the county and fertilization laws, language, objectives. And so just roughly objective for this audience. Every education measure that we can take to lower the nitrate levels in ground surface waters need to be explored. So existing law, Suffolk County Law 41-2007, It stipulates the time of application between November and April. I'm not sure that it goes over amounts, and it also goes over licensure, which means that everybody, any landscaper or contractor that applies fertilizer needs to have a license, but it's a one-time thing.
So there's no renewal
There's no renewal.
or licensing examination.
It's not an ongoing educational process. It's like a one-time, yeah.
You know, I think the laws do restrict density of the fertilizer application. So that backs into volume.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to just
Yeah,
go on Suffolk County, look this up, see what you find.
yep.
It's very broad, and it doesn't really get too specific. So the objective is for this committee to improve on local law, the timetable, licensure with ongoing education. For example, Martha's Vineyard stipulates that you have, every 3 years you visit the licensure. And you can do that online, the contractor can. So do we want to upgrade that? Homeowner
Let
education.
me just pause you there for
Sure.
a second. You used the phrase "this committee," and are you referring to us or a working group
proposed
across between the different committees, our intercommittee proposal? So again, we are trying to bring together expertise across committees now, and not, we've had too many committees independently examining these things and making suggestions, and we feel like if we speak with one voice, we're much better off.
Okay. Homeowner education, which is a big piece of what is missing on Shelter Island. There is very little to no homeowner education with regards to understanding what fertilizers are, what they do, when they should be applied, what a homeowner should be responsible for looking at. And that could be disseminated by the town and by contractors. That could be the responsibility of contractors. It should include soil testing, penalties for noncompliance, the efficacy of the educational component. Establish and implement best management practices. There are a lot of guidelines already out there with regards to what that means, how we can do that. I have a few in my file here. And then the documents, these are just a few of the many that support a nitrogen mitigation plan, if you will. The water management plan that was developed for Shelter Island in 2013 reviews fertilizer education and reviews plantings and planting in buffer zones where near shore areas. So there's no nitrogen runoff and phosphorus runoff. So there's a lot we already have. The Long Island Nitrogen Action Plan, which I have a copy of, and I don't know, I guess a member of the town would have to tell us if this ever was anything that the town implemented or looked at. There's a Nitrogen Smart Communities Program overview, and the LINAP, the Long Island Nitrogen Action Plan, was launched in 2016, and it allowed towns to become a member of this. And by becoming a member, there was reporting back to it. There were guidelines to follow, and they also put out a sample plan of action if we want to become active and start implementing some of their suggestions with regards to nitrogen reduction. And this is really very good. So again, there's so much out there already that we
So
can
we should
utilize.
have those posted on our website as well.
We should, well, I think maybe the committee wants to look at this and see
Right.
how do we want, is it going to be modified for Shelter Island? This is fairly broad. Our geology may be a little bit different than Bay Shore, if you will. So it's something we can use to look at.
Well, we can either, if you do have it in a document.
I do, I
yeah,
can
yes,
send it to
Send
you all.
it to the whole committee.
Yep. These are just some of the things that I thought could be topical for this greater committee.
Oh,
And just, in a couple of days ago, Scientific American started to talk about how that we have crossed 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries, and one of them wreaking havoc by triggering algal blooms, flows of phosphorus and nitrogen into the water. So we all know that it's detrimental to the environment, to human health. We understand that. So there's no shortage of information. And then very interesting enough, and Tim Pertel and I were talking about this, Florida landscaping laws. They support quality landscaping that conserves water, protects the environment, is adaptable by local conditions, and is drought tolerant. And this is law rebuts HOA's stipulation that everybody have a green lawn. So, for example, a homeowner can say, I don't want a green lawn, I want to be environmentally conscientious. So this law allows them to sort of circumnavigate that.
Is that a state law?
It's a state law.
State law.
Yeah, which is, to me, very advanced, but, you know. it's-
Right.
So finally, and again, this is not in any real great order, it's just sort of what I was been thinking about brainstorming. Is the county law 41-2007 enough, or should the town restrict differently or more deeply and go further with it? For example, this law says if there's any violation, call the Department of Health. That's the enforcement. Well, you call the Department of Health. What, are they going to send a representative out here? And when are they going to do it? How are they going to enforce? You know, it seems almost like ineffective to have that as being a violations result. Is creating a district of critical planning concern legal? That would have to be something for our town attorney to answer. What do we need to tailor specifically to Shelter Island soil and our conditions here? And that would go with discussion regarding if we want to be a nitrogen smart community. And then move beyond, and I think this is the most important and what we really all want to do. We want to move beyond the discussion and into some kind of implementation. Okay, so then this is just a model of what we can do to start the whole implementation process. So this is what I thought when Tim and I sat down and spoke, only being representative of two committees, we could kind of use this as our launch pad for.
And also a launch pad for this discussion. I
For this
see Andrew
discussion.
has his hand
So
up
you-
already, so.
Do we have does the town of Shelter Island have the legal authority to adopt rules that might be different than what the county has?
County rules supersede town laws. You know, we know that everybody above us supersedes us. But if we have a tighter restriction, that is our guiding restriction that we can use. I mean, the council people can answer this more effectively than I can, so.
We can be more restrictive than the county, we cannot be less restrictive.
When it comes to fertilizers, not pesticides.
Yeah, so that is an important distinction we should be aware of. We're gonna have a different problem when we talk about pesticides.
Yeah.
This is an easier discussion in some ways. Pesticides are kind of taken out of our hands.
We can't even talk about that, really. Yeah.
Fertilizers, we can talk about, so let's talk about them. And there were actually a couple of little legal questions in there. One was also, do we have any legal consideration in terms of forming a subcommittee or a cross
You
committee?
can't have a quorum of any of the committees that are meeting together. So you can have, two people from WAC, 2 from Green Options, 2 from whatever.
Having a meeting and reporting
We
back.
can't have a quorum of WAC meeting with quorum of WQI, or, as long as you're less than a quorum in each group, you can come together.
In other words, we don't have to go to Stephen for that.
Right.
We're good for that much, and that seems to be the way to work this, and it's also the most efficient way to work it with, is with 1 or 2 members from each committee getting together and then reporting back, so that we're working together, but also we're doing our independent work.
But if every once a quarter, maybe, you wanted all the committees to maybe just publicly notice it as a public meeting. If you wanted to meet, in a fuller sense, and talk about what you've already.
Publicly notice it, do it in the here, make it publicly accessible, absolutely.
Well, I think that's one of my questions is, do we want to make this like a roundtable discussion with different town groups, landscapers, perhaps representatives from the golf course? Do we want them to be part of it? Does this want to be a discussion? And we want to join the public as part of this discussion?
Well, and we already are doing that because we have Thursday, September 28th at 5 p.m.
Right.
at the library. We are having an open public meeting hosted by these committees. And,
Right.
as you said, it's a discussion.
It's a start.
Yeah. The other thing, there wasn't one other, I guess you just asked the legal question about can we be more restrictive?
Yeah, for example, when I was looking at Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, they created fertilizer districts because they were special districts not covered by Massachusetts law. They had the autonomy to develop this. I don't think that that is applicable to us in Suffolk County because the county has already created fertilizer laws. So do we have to become a district? Probably not sure about that. But what could we be and that's what my question would be to everybody, really. Could we be a district of critical planning concern? Because that's the language used to describe the fertilizer district's justification for creating themselves.
Right, so that's partially legal question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like.
Also, what do we want to do?
Certainly, one metric would be the nitrate levels as triggering district of concern, because fertilizers are a source of nitrates. And we certainly have that in the center.
Well, yeah, and when we go back to old business, we'll kind of check in with where we stand with our understanding of that.
So I had asked Tim, germane to that, I'd asked Tim Patel if he had any pie chart that showed what contribution that fertilizers made to the overall nitrate load. And he was looking into that. And Tim, I mean, maybe Ken, you know if there's a pie chart in our
I don't know
SharePoint?
about my chart. I know this has been in discussion since 2009, at least, with the original last revision of the comprehensive plan. The big issue is enforcement. We can make all the rules in the world, which we do have some already on the books. It gets down to the line I'm in there with regards to how we're going to implement and enforce whatever.
No, that's an extremely important comment, Ken. And in that context, I want to bring in that at the last library meeting, we had a very good suggestion about creating some sort of Green Star certification for landscapers. So rather than thinking about enforcement, having like Shelter Island approved landscapers who've gone through an educational program that we developed, who, agree to best practices so that people know that, so I don't know if what our process, what this committee's process and our process might be to, both have it. We do need the program, the educational program,
Right.
and the landscapers brought in and bought in to it. But it's a way to then when to turn to homeowners and say, here's how to engage positively. Use one of these landscapers who are.
And I think to your point, Ken, with Suffolk County law being the overarching law that applies to us right now, and the enforcement of that, which is pretty much nothing, it's impossible to do. Any kind of local measure that we can take would be that much more enforceable, and say like on a pie chart, it would demonstrate that even 2% of our nitrate overload had to do with fertilizer. If we can reduce that by 0.5%, then we're reducing it by 0.5%. So if we have something local that a committee can address and then discuss, well, okay, so we have an issue here, enforcement isn't, it's not working, then we can keep that conversation.
We depend on the vendors an awful lot. Like today, we have regulations on the nearshore areas and how far you should go with your fertilizer sprays.
Exactly.
As you're applying it, 75 feet or something like that. We have several laws like that on the books. But here again, we're depending upon the vendors really to be knowledgeable and then to do it. And considering wind and all the other ways that they apply this stuff.
And demonstrate that they will do that and agree to, agree to that. And in return, we can refer people to them.
And I think that's one more aspect to the education process that I just like to put out there, and that is that we have landscapers that are responsible, completely responsible, doing their job, protecting themselves and the environment. But then we also have many companies that do landscaping on the island. We don't know if they've ever gone through the educational process. We don't look for license on their trucks.
Well, there's just a lot of
There's a lot.
ad hoc landscaping
Exactly.
Done by people who work for regular landscaping companies during the week, and then on the weekends, they're freelancing, and they're not subject to anything.
Yep. And that's a big component.
They may not have insurance, et cetera, et cetera. And
And on the flip side, they can be
very
positive.
affordable.
Yes?
That may be, but on the flip side, there may be people like that who want to go even further and do more green landscaping approaches. And we kind of want to promote those folks. Yeah. So again, we'll take that to committee, to this cross committee. Again, before we move from this topic, again, all of us should try as best we can to participate in the library sessions that happen. Do other folks here want to comment on a fertilizer education program, or anybody online? Yes.
I just had a question for Lisa. Do many of our HOAs, as far as you know, require people to keep their lawns green?
I do not know if the Shelter Island Association has any kind of architectural, mandate. I don't think so, but do you?
So the Shelter Island Association is not a homeowners association itself, it's an umbrella organization. But we will be meeting here at 5 o'clock, and I will raise the issue of going back to homeowners associations, discouraging green lawn laws, that sort of question, and even just asking, are there?
And it may not, Julie, be that there is anything on the books, but it may be an aesthetic. I think it is for a lot of us, and we may not even realize it. So it's just, and that's a big job to change a mindset.
I know Silver Beach has.
We have on the website, even now, we have some recommendations, living in the Silver Beach.
Oh, yeah, the quality of life tab.
Gardening.
Yeah. But that's completely green in terms of its approach.
It's green, but it's not encouraging green lawns. It's encouraging dry landscape.
Thank you. But it also talks about light pollution and other things that have to do with the overall ecosystem.
Right. But yeah, I do think that developing an ethic, an aesthetic of landscaping that is not consuming excess water and is not encouraging fertilization or pesticide use is a big part of this. And I think Tim will be able to bring in a lot of that material into the library conversation. I think it's a two-sided a three-sided conversation. Enforcement, encouragement, and green stars and things like that, and landscaping to avoid the problem in the first place. Landscaping and irrigation to avoid the problem in the first place.
Yeah. Before we move from this,
go ahead.
can I just ask, I know there's been a lot of back and forth email. I'm not sure formally who's been invited to this. Obviously, the WQI knows about it, and the Green Committee, CAC reps. Do we have any CAC reps that are committed to coming?
Well,
and do we want to?
So Howard and Mark have been from the CSC have been involved in the email threads. They haven't offered to do a presentation, but we should definitely keep communicating, a line open to them. Okay,
and who else should I?
So when I spoke with James Eklund, he was saying, well, WMAC, all this flows into the waterways, and should they be engaged too? And they are also have a science program as well, monitoring nitrogen levels in our waterways. So therefore, I would think the more the merrier here.
Okay, I'm just trying to gather the information as to who the formal introduction wants to, and invitation wants to go to. I know that Tim Patel was going to ask a landscaper. I tried to follow up with a couple of landscapers. I can't even find telephone numbers for some of these guys, so.
I'll do this big.
I'm sorry?
Put me on the list.
Yeah.
Jay, are you a representative for Gardeners Bay Country Club?
Also, well.
Because it would be great to have golf course reps.
Yeah, I can do both.
Okay.
I got those other two numbers if you want.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I would like them, Tom.
Yeah, that's really great.
And anybody else who can think of that, the Martha's Vineyard invitation went out to, like, for example, landscapers, golf courses, arborists. Well, I can't think of all on the top, off the top of my head, but anybody who's invested in the business should be present as part of the discussion. So if you think of anybody, just let me know.
L Shaw at shelterislandtowns.us.
You can find me, I'm on the website. I have an address, an email address.
Yep.
All right, so hopefully it'll be a good turnout and we can get a lot of discussion.
And I will again raise the awareness at the Shelter Island Association out to all the homeowner communities, homeowner association communities.
And also the comp plan, Comprehensive Planning Commission.
You were asking about a pie chart breaking down where nitrogen was coming from with regards to fertilizers versus wastewater. I have that.
Right. I know that that's been
And for
produced.
Suffolk County. So I can send it to you.
Like to have that. It's a great visual to have.
Official.
Okay.
Okay, other comments on the fertilizer education relation? So
Yes.
the next two topics.
Can you hear me?
Sorry, yeah, Penny.
Yeah, I'm really happy to see this happening. I'm especially happy to see that you're working in tandem with other committees, because this is an issue that is really critical to the island. And I really also think that including the committee that is dealing with our bays and estuaries is really critical to participate, because the nitrogen, of course, goes into the bay as well. There, so I'm excited about what you're talking about. And I really hope that we can get the community on board and make it sort of the in thing to take our lawns more seriously, of not going green and wilding them and saving our resources here. So I'm very happy to see this. Thanks.
Thank you, Penny. Other comments online? So again, the next two topics, the Monadnock Creek Keepers Conservancy Report, Chase Creek. I see that Christopher Herman is here with us. We have Alice and Linda are here as well on site. But before we go there, I actually wanted to introduce Bob Moser, who is a retired hydrogeologist. Bob and I started to talk because he has started a campaign around adopting a pond, protecting ponds, and since I was doing that fresh pond work, he and I came into contact through the New York State Federation of Lake Associations and the CSLAP program that Fresh Pond has been under for 7 years. And I found that his background so dovetailed with our work. I'd like him to have a chance to just introduce himself. He's certainly interested in what we're doing. He's working in Southampton on the Adopt a Pond program and beyond. Oh.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me and speak at your meeting a little bit. I'll try to keep this concise so you can keep the meeting moving forward. Yeah, it was sort of serendipitous that I reached out to Peter. I got his name from the NSFOLA/CSLAP program people. Nancy Mueller actually was the one that gave me the information to contact Peter. But there were also three other organizations in the town of Southampton, aside from you guys on Shelter Island. So I, realized that there's, at least in the town of Southampton, there's a lot of ponds. And I just kind of roughly estimated somewhere between 40 and 50 ponds. Some of them are quite notorious and lots of them are not. They're almost like they're private ponds for individuals, even though every one of the ponds is supposed to be there for the benefit of the freeholders of the town of Southampton. And so I saw that there was I asked for the list of people on the East End, organizations that were participating in the CSLAP program, because I wanted to consider joining the CSLAP program for what I'm doing and have done for the last 3 years.
Bob, I'm just going to interrupt you for half a second. The CSLAP stands for, we always get stuck on acronyms, Citizens Statewide Lake Assessment Program. It is a citizen science program supported by the New York State Federation of Lake Associations and with the Department of Environment and Conservation. Go ahead, Bob.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't, I just assumed that Yeah.
Sure, but we have the public here.
Silly me. Okay. Okay. I got it. And so I'm forgetting where I left off. So I basically contacted all four of these organizations that are involved with the CSLAP program, trying to find out whether there's already an existing organization or some kind of group, whether it's, you know, a Facebook group or a Google group or whatever, where you guys are communicating with each other about your experiences with CSLAP so that I could decide whether I want to join it. Now, I've called my project, and I call it my project, I call it Adopt a Pond. And I'm trying to create a public awareness in the town of Southampton about what I've tried to do for the last 3 years since I retired. Now, to go back a little further, I have 25 years experience in my first career working as a hydrogeologist for a nationally known firm known as Garrity and Miller. These days, they're known as Arcadis. I worked for them for plus almost 20, well, in the business for 25 years, Garrity and Miller for about 10. In my 50s, let me back up a second. So most of my work involved characterizing soil and groundwater conditions mostly at Superfund sites. So these are contaminated sites that have soil and groundwater contamination, which are under a consent order either from the EPA or the DEC to characterize the nature and extent of contamination at these sites and then come up with a remedial action plan. And the program is called the Remedial Investigation Feasibility Study. Some of you may be familiar with that process, and some of you aren't, but that primarily is what I did for 25 years after receiving my master's degree from Oneonta in geology. Now, since I've retired from that business, I decided that I want to go into education, and because I'd always had a passion for teaching, but I wanted to do that after I had experience in the field working as a geologist, so that what I brought to the classroom was more than just going from one book to another book and creating lesson plans. So I did that, and I like to say it in a way that I hope gets a little chuckle from you. But what I did was try to teach science to 12-year-olds. And that was quite a challenge, believe me. Some of my worst clients weren't as difficult as trying to teach science to 12-year-olds. Lots going on.
Teaching science to 60-plus-year-olds.
Right, that too. And I guess I'm getting my chance. So, thank you. Was there a question?
No, you're giving the general background. Stepping ahead, you've moved from education onward to?
Right, to moving into now what I call the Adopt a Pond project. So I realized that how many 50-plus ponds in the town of Southampton are not being monitored at all, unless they already have a problem. So Mill Pond, Agawam Lake, you name it. They're having a problem. They're being investigated. They're spending, hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to figure out what's causing the problem, never mind cleaning them up. So I hooked up with Chris Gobler, I've known for years, and found out that as long as I brought the samples to him, he would do the analysis for determining whether or not there were algal blooms occurring in the ponds. So for the past 3 years, I've been collecting samples from 6 ponds on the western side of town of Southampton, bringing them to Gobler and getting results on a weekly basis for whether or not we have a harmful algal bloom. Well, thankfully, we have not had one, blue-green algae bloom. But monitoring the levels, I think as a hydrogeologist is something you need to do.
And we bring you in because, again, we have a number of citizen science projects developing on Shelter Island, a number that have gone on for many years. And we too, I immediately recognized that the need to extend this work beyond Shelter Island to extend in general is important. I also want to point out that Bob's experience as a hydrogeologist essentially involved the kind of flow modeling that we've been doing on. So essentially, that's what you were doing for the Superfund sites. Now doing flow, essentially mod flow, right?
Okay, well, yeah, I was part of that process. I mean, characterizing groundwater flow starts really with putting a series of monitoring wells so that you can characterize the three-dimensional. It's not two-dimensional, it's a three-dimensional flow field. And depending on the project, modeling may or may not be required. So not every project involved doing digital modeling to the extent that you would need to use ModFlow. But certainly there were projects I worked on that involved.
And did you have a chance to look at the ModFlow modeling, the work that we did on top of the USGS ModFlow modeling of the entirety of Long Island for the proposed, not presently moving forward, wastewater treatment center, or have you not yet had a chance to see that for Shelter Island?
I only recall, and here again, I may have it may
Just
got
an email.
lost, but I saw your link to the groundwater contributing area report, and I'm very familiar with that. And I was able to download all the data files from that report, so I can work with them visually within the ArcGIS and online environment to be able to, see what are the contributing areas to these freshwater bodies.
Okay, so I'm going to pause you now just because, again, I'd like you to see some of what's going on within our own community. Again, I think that you have a lot to contribute here, and but I want to make sure that we have all our guests and everyone who needs to report back have enough time. So thank you for the moment, and we'll come back to you.
Okay, all right, thanks, everyone.
Yeah, and so again, I just thought that was important before we launch into citizen science work, of which we, again, have really great project going on in Monantic. So I don't know if David has been able to join us.
Well, I don't think he's come on, so.
Okay, so you're gonna have to handle it on your own.
I'm sure I'm gonna try to share my screen, see if I can do this. Okay. Let's see, share the screen. I'll see that one. Okay, let me get that up better. Right up there. Okay, so we've been downloading data since June 3rd. This is the Midway Road site that we've had in the longest, and this is the last few weeks of data. We presented some of the earlier data previously. David Shanker has been taking what we get and graphing it for us. So this is showing the adjusted dissolved oxygen for the week of the 19th through the 26th of August.
And just for those who were in here in previous meetings, Monantic has put in 2 real-time dissolved oxygen and other factors.
Yes, we have one at 18 South Midway Road, and one is at 15 Monantic, which is Mike Anglin's house, his dock. And the red line is below that is not where you want to be at all. So I don't know if you can.
2 milligrams.
Yeah, and our averages have been quite low, 5.74. The temperatures have been getting a little better. The salinities remained high. And I'll just roll down to the next week, which looks even worse. This is when we had that blue moon full tide. There's so many variables in this that aren't just temperature.
Right, nothing simple.
Nothing simple. But this is like when we had some of the extreme low tides and extreme high tides. So you see it's like kind of up all over the place. And I personally don't know how to evaluate this, but the numbers don't look good. And this is the kind of variability we were talking about. And then I'll go on to, this takes us, the following week, it starts to get a little bit better. And then this past week, a little bit better. The temperatures are cooling. The salinity is remaining high. The dissolved oxygen is staying a bit higher. The Monantic site the numbers are a little better. This last reading, we had a little trouble with the The conductivity sensor, I think it fouled and wasn't giving us good readings for part of the session. So we're gonna recheck it again on Friday. We just relaunched it yesterday. But also the water where we have that sensor is deeper. So we seem to get slightly higher dissolved oxygen and it seems to, and the temperatures are slightly cooler. And this is a kind of variability.
Just, this correlates with tide, right?
A lot of it does.
That's why you have a consistent up and down, just for the sake of those who may not know. Right.
Yes,
Okay.
because we,
Sunlight.
yes, and sunlight. So we get our worst readings at night at really low tides.
Makes sense.
Combination.
Yeah, and also the water's been very turbid, very murky. I don't know if it's an algal bloom or what, but there's not a lot of light penetration anymore either. So we aren't seeing the rebounds that we saw earlier in the season when the water was clearer. So I'm really curious to see where this goes as it gets colder and then the water starts to clear more.
Right.
And we'll see.
You track temperature?
Yes.
You do have that?
Yes,
Good.
yes. Our average temperature this past week was 78.7, the water. It's been in the high 70s. And we got really hot at that time in July when things got really warm. We got up in the 80s. So we're starting to trend downwards, but it fluctuates with how many days of sunlight we get.
On an hourly basis or a daily basis?
These readings are taken every half hour.
Every half hour.
Which is a tremendous amount of data.
Yes.
So there's discussion of maybe going to every hour going forward, but we had to start somewhere. So that's kind of a representative of what we're seeing. And then, I don't know, Joe, we had a conversation.
Right, so again, the Menanta Creek Conservancy is now functioning reporting as a subcommittee to the WAC. Joe, myself, David, yourself, Linda, met during in between our last two meetings. Joe had an interesting conversation with the
Marine Sciences, from Cornell.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So
Just a quick conversation update. So the working theory at this point that we're going to refine with more data, especially as the seasons change, is that Menanta Creek has increased, whether it's artificially influenced and increased or natural, but increase in sedimentation from runoff, increase in nutrient load from runoff, be it surface runoff or nutrient load from groundwater contributions to the area. In any case, it's decreasing or increasing turbidity. It's also increasing the presence of algal bloom, so the water is has a heavier load of photosynthetic organisms. That cycle of high turbidity, excess algae is increasing the organic material on the bottom. It's also making, for an environment that's not suitable for natural seagrasses and other photosynthetic organisms on the bottom. So the first step in this estuary degradation is the deterioration of static photosynthetic organisms on the bottom. So seagrasses that would normally be in the bottom producing oxygen, they don't receive enough sunlight. They're also being covered with silt and sedimentation from decaying algae in the water. And we're sort of in phase 2 of that now, where we've lost those first initial oxygen contributors. And what's happening now is in the peak season, where we have high water temperature, which holds less oxygen, we're seeing the oxygen levels at the bottom suffer at low tide cycles, particularly at night. So what happens is the organic material is dying in the water column, it's moving to the bottom, it's organically decaying. At nighttime, when the sun goes away, any other photosynthesizing organisms stop producing oxygen. So at night, the organic material at the bottom has the opportunity to suck the oxygen out of the water. And now we're getting readings of low oxygen levels that would cause other things to start to die. So now we'd be looking at your shellfish population not having an opportunity to survive in these high stress environments. according to Cornell, the oxygen levels are not low enough where we would see sort of mass extinction of all shellfish species, but certainly this aligns well with some of the more susceptible shellfish species like scallops. And so that qualitatively aligns with some of the observations we're seeing throughout the estuary, that this isn't the place where, we're losing scallop harvest each year. These kinds of conditions are what we would expect to see in other creeks and estuaries where we have accumulated this thick, mucky bottom, that sandy substrate that shellfish and seagrass thrive in is sort of being covered now by all this other decaying material from excess algae from.
That light-colored sand reflects light as well.
Exactly. And not only does it provide a nice base for those other organisms to grow in, but it also doesn't suck up the oxygen from the water column because of decay. So it's still early. That's not a unique working theory to just Menantic Creek. That's something that the marine scientists at Cornell are seeing in other places, but in looking at this data preliminarily, they're seeing a lot of the same characteristics. So the goal is to continue to collect data as we see the seasons change to see if these trends or other trends emerge. But we're inching our way closer in understanding perhaps what the contributors are. And interestingly, this may not be a story unique to Menantic Creek. It may be something that we can extrapolate to our other creeks. And the same would go for the solution. We're working towards here may be applicable in many other places, and it may help guide other policies as we talk about fertilizer districts or groundwater contributions from wastewater flows or irrigation. All these pieces will likely come together. And so far, this data has been excellent, absolutely excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a comment because for those of you who are familiar with the watershed management plan back in 2013, one of their huge recommendations was monitoring of West Neck Harbor and West Neck Bay. Yeah. I mean, that was number one topic that we should be doing. That's 10 years ago.
Right. Yeah. I actually, on new business, Gordon took me to the White property. I was kind of examining it. I've been looking at it aerially, and we have an estuary there that would be a control case against what happens when you don't have nitrogen contribution into one of those creeks. And it's right off of West Neck. Right off of West Neck Creek. So, I'm hopeful that maybe we can start to think about comparatively we tease out some of the factors by examining where we're not having nitrogen contribution from either septic system.
I think we ought to be monitoring Gardner's Creek, West Neck Creek.
But we need this, we need
all of these places.
The Army to do this, and that's why Chris Herman is here to talk about Chase Creek.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So we're trying to pull together precisely that Army. So, okay, so there was one other little bit I thought was important. Jay, yes.
So when I was a kid, back in the day, a long time ago, the county had, 3, 4, 5 dredges. And ever since there have been massive cutbacks from that project, there's been a massive decline in the quality of our creek water. I'm sure that if you go back and look in time at the aerial photos, you're going to see where the choke points are by freezes, right, which is the first choke point right there.
Yep.
That if you could open that up out to West Neck Harbor, you would see a drastic increase in the quality of the creek.
Alice, do you want to comment?
Well, and the dredging they're planning to do is gonna come not that far.
Not far enough.
Not far enough.
Not far
And
enough.
that's why, this is part of why we want to show that we need to go further and figure out how we can do that. Because I was basically told, don't stop it, don't tell the county you want more. Let them do what they're gonna do, and then let's figure out how to take.
How to get some more.
How to get more. Because if we go to them, they're just gonna stop, and we may not get what we're getting.
And we've studied a little bit what was done historically. People would loosen up the creeks a little bit.
Right.
With pulling an anchor behind a boat during an outgoing tide.
Right.
And
I water skied there on Christmas Day.
And we used to water ski in there when we were kids.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd all stir up the bottom and we'd rake for scallops and we'd drag stuff out there. Nobody's doing any of that anymore. So nothing's moving in there.
Possibly, maybe when the county comes, rather than them do it, let them pay a contractor to come do it. We could pick up the difference to get to where it needs to go.
kind of, yes.
That's kind of
Great
where
minds
we're
here.
hoping to, yeah. So
So thank you, Jay.
Yes.
So there was one other connection I wanted to make. And so not only is this not necessarily a problem just in Menantic, but we do have, I mentioned earlier that Caitlin Cunningham from the United States Geological Survey will be with us on our next meeting. And she's the person in charge for the USGS of the South Ferry Hills Real-Time Monitoring Station. And there too, Alice, you had a brief conversation with her, I believe.
Yes, I mean, we've asked her a number of questions along the way, you know, like.
Develop your science.
Yeah, and she helped us to, you know, decide what should your starting baseline for testing be? You know, what should you be looking for and how might you go about it? Because we, of course, can't afford the equipment that they have at South Ferry. So ours is a lot more labor intensive than theirs is. But anyway, yeah, she's been very helpful. And we've looked at their data and our data, and it's been very confirming, I guess, to see like, you know, we look at stuff and then we look at theirs and we say, well, yeah, that's happening there too. Maybe not, it's aligned. It may not be in the same degree that we're getting it, but we see the same kinds of ups and downs. It's quite interesting.
Right. I think that it's important for us to keep in mind this context. We're in Peconic Bay River, and so there's a larger problem set here. But that doesn't mean that you know, a series of steps can't help the larger picture, but we need to be looking to the larger picture as well, which is why I wanted Caitlin to join us.
I have one question. Has the Conservancy, the Nature Conservancy, done any studies on, for example, the ponds in the Conservancy, which would seem to be free from at least septic in?
My recommendation.
Yeah. Like sort of like a baseline model?
Yeah, I mean, I would say look at Missaney's Creek, which has little to no septic waste around it. I mean, there's the Manor House, but they've upgraded all of their systems to IACE in the last few years. I would use Meshamik's water quality as a baseline for what it looks like with minimal septic waste input.
Right, as a control.
There's
The only reason I
also-
mention West Neck is because, again, it's so close to Menantic and it's in the system, but
But
yes.
that is such a highly concentrated downflow area from half of the center, all of Westmoreland. I mean, it's absolutely receiving.
It is receiving, but what it tells me is what happens if locally around an estuary, you start to cut off your nitrogen inflows.
Yeah, I would start with Meshamik.
I
There are areas of
Not
Meshamik
looking at-
attached to an area that, you know, gets any nitrogen. I would
All right,
say-
but that means outreach to Meshamik, and I've always felt that that's a, you know, that we need all the parts of our community to be kicking in, so we need to be thinking about.
I could try to do that.
Would you?
Yeah, I would, because I think it's a very interesting idea as a benchmark, if you will.
Yeah, I think it's the best benchmark you could provide, but.
Groundwater nitrates are low in that area, not
Which is
surprisingly.
logical.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and relatively isolated also, which is the other, right.
So
Hydrogen.
virtually no runoff topically and no introduction of septic failure.
Well, no, I guess adulterated runoff, you know.
Yeah, influenced by humans. There is runoff, but it's all
Well, yes.
natural runoff.
Yeah.
Right.
And I know they were doing shellfish work there too in Meshamik, and I wonder how successful, whether that's continued to be successful, or they're having the same problems.
So I don't even know if it's happening.
It will be interesting to learn, Lisa, if someone on Shelter Island at the Nature Conservancy can make a decision, or if they have to check with someone in Washington, DC.
Yes. I realize
There's
there's
some diplomacy in this discussion.
there is a sentiment that it is no longer a local organization.
Indeed.
However, I would hope that their environmental thrust, if you will, has integrity regardless of where they are.
Me too.
I will go on that.
Me too.
Good, so again, sensitive, but let's bring people into the community, not assume that they're out of it. And if, you know, there's a wider context for them as well. Okay, so I actually don't want to leave this topic, but I do want to bring in since we're talking about the creeks, Christopher, are you with us, Christopher Herman? I know I don't know if have you stepped away or are you hearing me, Christopher Herman? Not necessarily.
Muted, right?
All right.
Yeah, he's got to get unmuted.
Oh, here he comes.
Yeah, sorry, I was floundering for which button to push.
Perfectly fine. So we also had a meeting, Joe and Kate Rossi Snuck and Christopher and another member of his community, Jose, what's his last name? Christopher?
Jose
Fernandez. We all met to begin to discuss the similar, but maybe even worse situations that have developed in Chase Creek. And Christopher, I thought you took really, really good notes about just sort of the takeaways of approaches that you guys, as you begin to form, kind of follow behind the steps of Menanti Creek keepers. So would you want to just kind of review your takeaways from that meeting?
Well, I can report very briefly. It's the creek has continued to be turbid, as described in the last meeting a month ago. Both high tides and low tides, I would say. And I was very interested to hear Joe's very helpful summary of the dynamics there. We've tried to think about what kind of monitoring we can undertake to contribute to, action relevant data. There's some talk about maybe trying to do some profiling of the bottom to see how shallow it actually is in the low tide. My impression is it's just a matter of a few inches in fairly large portions of the creek. I'd like to get a fix on that if it would be useful. Another area, we've been just trying to continue to reach out to the experts that have been suggested to us and find out more on the historical condition of the past, both with respect to the size of the creek before the bridge was put in and the history of dredging. I've put in a FOIA request to DEC in hopes of learning more about the dredging history. People have confirmed that there was dredging in the creek, which hopefully might be resumed and maybe extended if that proves to be needed. But so that's, and we did get together with the Menanti Creek people just the other day, yesterday, to get a fix on, get introduced to that really terrific program they put in place there.
And David also made mention that you had a handheld device that could be.
Me too. We haven't really had a chance to do much with it except to sort of play around with it. But we were trying to see whether maybe we could use it to try to even probe the sediment and see what kind of readings we might get there.
It just strikes me that that would be awfully helpful for Christopher as well.
Yeah. I mean, the thing with that is it's a snapshot.
Right.
I mean,
you're just beginning to get a sense.
You have to realize that the results vary so much that you're getting, low tide, high tide, whatever weather. It's not you don't get the same kind of, it's great for checking well, is this result that we're getting now, does that coincide with what I'm getting now? But there's such a variety. I think that's why I got it, because I thought it'd be interesting to kind of fool around with and see what kinds of things we got. But it really is just a snapshot.
Nevertheless, Christopher is at the beginning of a process here and just beginning to be able to show, you can measure these things.
Yes, you can measure these things.
What you'd want to do with that information would be useful within his community.
Yes.
And just even the ability, we as citizens can do some of this work.
Yep.
So that's, I'm eager to bring you together. Christopher, did you want to, were there other things that you would want to bring out before?
Well, Alice mentioned, it's probably familiar territory to this group, the Peconic Estuary
Partnership. Yeah.
And a meeting, they're having a Citizens Action Committee meeting in Riverhead on Thursday. I thought I would try to get there if I possibly can.
Yeah, the more connections you can help bring to us and to the community, the better.
And I'm gonna attend that meeting.
You're gonna attend that?
Yeah.
Great.
It's at 5:30 on Thursday at the Big Duck.
At the big.
That's right. Last time I was at a brewery. I thought that was maybe a little better. Anyway.
All right, well, so again, and you know, I think Doug made the very good point that we really should be trying to extend this to all of our creeks and having citizens groups in each of our creeks beginning to become part of an army where we're contributing together to an understanding of the overall system.
I think we would add Crab Creek to this discussion as well.
And again, but it depends, given that the town doesn't have the personnel and doesn't have, you know, necessarily the money to, you know, just hire people to do it. It really depends on a community forming around each of our major surface water bodies and saying, and you know, like Robert's program, adopt a creek. Adopt it.
You know, the DEC is monitoring like West Neck. Put a boat out there, they measure the dissolved oxygen, the salinity, the temperature, et cetera. So that data is out there, at least for West Neck.
Do you know how frequently they do that?
I don't, but in our discussions with our East Brander tidal wetlands, which is a small estuary, we've been interacting with them to get them to come and measure that little, you know, 1 acre body of water as well. But it was clear that they had made recent measurements. They also did one, I believe, in Crab Creek as well, and they're doing that in order to monitor conditions for shellfishing.
Sorry, Doug, who did you say was this?
New York State DEC.
And you know, and I guess the question begs, why stop at creeks? Why not Deering Harbor? Why not Cockles Harbor?
Yeah.
I mean.
Great point.
You're absolutely right. But creeks are special in a certain way. Estuarine environments are going to be the factories of natural engines for cleanup of our water as it passes out into the.
But, you know, I think the other thing is that these various bodies of water are different in the sense that some have a lot of human interaction simply because there are a lot of homes fronting onto the creek, like Monantic Creek, for example, compared to Crab Creek, which might have 8 homes fronting on it, as opposed to West Neck, which would have tens of homes.
As opposed to the Nature Conservancy, it's
Exactly. So I do think that, you know, human interaction has created the siltation issue that we have that makes these creeks shallow, but also obviously the nitrate, other bad elements.
So doing the citizen science both where there are homeowners and where there are not, and where there are not, it's going to be
It could be interesting.
process. Yes. Yeah, Andrew.
So I'm not a scientist. But I guess my question is, what hypothesis is guiding the data collection? Is driving the site selection? Is driving the metrics that are being measured? And what theory is being tested by the data collection? And how is that being written down and guiding all of this data collection? Who owns the design of this work?
It's good. It's an excellent question. I think that it's up to us to find ways to own it and to bring the appropriate scientists in, like the USGS, like people like Robert Moser, people who have both the hydrological background and the biological background.
Okay, so this committee.
I think at this point, isn't it just, it's data collection?
Yeah, but, okay.
But you do.
My issue with just data collection.
At this point.
Okay, my question with just data collection is what are we measuring and why? So Joe got into a description of some of the ecological processes that are going on in these creeks and what kind of environment needs to exist to promote to create habitat for desirable species and so forth. So that was kind of the start of or that to me was a little bit around the scientific structure that would guide the data collection. But we as a committee have recommended that the island, the town, hire a hydrologist. Okay, that's more about fresh water, okay, than it is about salt water and basically estuary environments. It's not too far away. But I guess my concern is.
Estuary means mixing of the fresh and the salt.
Yeah, I guess my concern is it's good to have citizens engaged in participating in this. It's not so good to have citizens spinning their wheels, which is collecting data that kind of goes nowhere. And so my question is, who's articulating the scientific principles that underlie the data collection?
Again, I don't think we can step away from this responsibility. If not us, who?
Well, Peter,
we're not
the data collection was guided by outside technical advice. So the purpose of what we're testing for was already advised by the USGS, for instance, and the data types that we're collecting were intended to be diagnostic. So these are core water quality principles that we are collecting and are going to then share with other technical advisors to help back a hypothesis from out of the data. Contrary to we didn't go into this with a hypothesis, really just qualitatively based on citizen science. We have observed decreasing abundance of life, decreasing water quality, et cetera, et cetera.
Although I do think that we had the hypothesis that dissolved oxygen was at the root of the decline in Menantic Creek, and that dredging and opening up would help, and that we should be measuring dissolved oxygen before dredging and opening up.
Right, baseline.
And then we brought the USGS in to sort of validate, okay, is this the right approach? What else should we be measuring? So again, I mean, it's an interaction back and forth with the scientific community, but where are the responsible people here we need the right consultants in. I want that hydrologist on the Shelter Island team. I want to continue our partnership with the United States Geological Survey, but the synthesis, we're the ones who know what's going on our island. And I think we are generating reasonable hypotheses and then getting them cross-checked with the scientific community. So yes, I agree with you. I don't want to spin people's wheels.
Is there a memorandum that lays all that out and said, here's what we see, here's the working theory behind all that, here's what we need to go out and measure to validate whether or not that's actually going on?
I think that you're proposing that we should be developing a memorandum along those lines.
I think we're approaching that juncture now. This data's a week old. We had this conversation 2 weeks ago, and that was really the first time we even had enough data to share.
We're just trying to develop baseline data to see what's going on. Okay, now what?
With the critical variables.
Right. And I will say, Dr. Gobler has started taking some samples and testing in Menantic and other areas around here. So there are other groups who are working on this that we're hoping to share this information with and come together with on some of this.
And we left off with Cornell in that it was almost too early to make